Well, we're going to talk for a bit about how the church shines when its attention is so fragmented. And to begin things, I want to start us off with a story. Many of us had to read the Odyssey or the Iliad back in high school. You know the story of Odysseus, who is crossing the sea, and he heard tales of these creatures called Sirens. They sing out this magnificent song, luring sailors into the rocks, and their ships become destroyed. But Odysseus is clever. And so he fills his men's ears with wax so they won't be distracted. But Odysseus is also someone who's deeply curious. And so he has them tie him to the mast so he can hear the siren song, and tells them no matter how much he tries to wrangle free, tie him even tighter. I believe that this is the metaphor for the age in which we live and for the attention systems that we surround ourselves with. Our key question for our time together today is simply this: what if our people are being formed by sirens capturing their attention, and shepherding means learning how to guide them again and again back to the voice of Christ in the middle of it all? I once heard a great presenter say that Romans is really the great missional letter in the Bible. So I thought I would use Romans here. Now, you guys know the story of Romans, right? Paul's writing this letter to a church that he didn't get to start. So he begins it really laying out like, what is Christianity? What's it all about? But there's that pivot point, 11 and 12. He gets more into the implications of what does this mean? And in chapter 12, he starts it this way. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. I think the church through every age has simply needed to answer this question of what does it mean to be conformed to this world in this age? What is the thing trying to conform our people? And as shepherds in 2026, I think one of the most helpful ideas for this is understanding the topic of the attention economy. Show of hands, how many of you have ever heard or used the word attention economy before? Okay, a few. There's a few nerds in the room. That's awesome. So the phrase attention economy is really this question of how do we receive information and what do we give our attention to? It was coined by Herbert A. Simon in the 1970s. He was a psychologist who used the term. And really, it comes out of this place where information systems grow and grow and grow and grow. And the limited thing in the economic system becomes people's attention. There's other writers in the 70s, 80s, and 90s who are pretty prolific on this. On the left, you have Neil Postman, who writes a book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, talking about this way in which we interact with technology and how it also forms and shapes us. You have Marshall McLuhan, a little more philosophical, writing The Medium is the Message. The way in which we communicate ends up informing how we communicate and what's being said. So let's give a brief kind of overview of this concept of the attention economy. If you go back in human history, for most of human history, if you want to receive information, if you want to learn, if you want to know something, there's two ways you can do it. Either you go out into the world around you and you try things and you experiment, right? You do things with the earth around you, or primarily, where do you learn it? Other people. They tell it to you, right? It's oral cultures. Traditions are passed down from families for generations to generations. Paper is a little more of a rarity. If you read the Bible, you have, the story of Ezra finding the scroll. Why? Because literature, books were much more rare, but we're all good Lutherans in this room. We know where I'm headed right after this. There's a revolution that takes place in the 1450s. What gets invented? The printing press. And all of a sudden, instead of information being limited to the people that are sharing it with you, you have books coming out. You have the whole information system starting to be disrupted. And Martin Luther is the early adapter in this system, and he does fantastic with it. Like the Reformation would not have happened without the printing press. Like the way one author put it, he says, Luther and his allies used pamphlets in a way that made the press itself a subversive medium, putting interpretation into the hands of readers, raising new questions about authority and theology and society. Luther leveraged this technology for the sake of disruption so more would know the gospel. We're going to fast forward a little bit into another major revolution in information. You get the radio. All of a sudden, radio broadcasts are piped into people's homes. They can gather around devices to hear and get updates. Similarly, like 30, 40 years after that, you have the television. People are gathering around screens for broadcasts that are piped into their homes. And you know what's amazing? Is Lutherans are once again incredible disruptors in this area. There was an interview in Time magazine in the 1950s. I love the way they put it. They said, converts are pouring in, attracted by billboards, magazine ads, TV programs, and in the Lutheran Hour, the most widely broadcast sermon on radio, 1,209 stations, a campaign of preaching and teaching and reaching, organized by the Evangelical Lutheran Churches, ringing doorbells, organizing study groups. The synod's salesmanship is traditionally aggressive. You ever think we would be described as traditionally aggressive today? Its Lutheran Hour radio program is the best known denominational broadcast on the air, and its TV program, This Is the Life, is the biggest budget religious telecast in the US. We were disruptors. We leveraged this technology for an incredible way for the sake of the kingdom. Information systems continue to grow. Many of you remember the early internet in your lifetime, right? It's a crazy thing. You can go onto a computer, you can look up information. You have the rise of search engines that are categorizing all this information that's on the internet. And so you'll notice, right? We went from a little bit of information to more information to more information. And it even grows from there because you have social media feeds where it's not just that you're learning information, but you're inputting your information. You're sharing your story, right? Early Facebook, you can poke your friends. You can go onto their profile. You can see what's going on. You know what I can't say here? I can't say that there was a lot of Lutheran disruption in these technologies. I don't have like a Lutheran Hour ministry stories of, man, we got on board and we killed it when it came to the internet. I was talking with a well-respected colleague about this, and I love the way that she put it, where she said, you know, Joe, maybe part of the reason for this is if you look at how we have used technologies in the past, what does the pattern look like? You have one speaker, one person who's giving the ideas, one person who's giving the input, and everybody receives it. For Luther, he's making pamphlets, you're receiving it and reading it. For radio broadcasts, it's going over the airways, you're listening to it and receiving it. For television shows, you're watching it, you're receiving it, and we never catechized or trained our people on how to respond. And with the internet, you have a technology that invites instantaneous response. And we've never taught our people how to do that. Information systems continue to grow even past that. See, this is where the attention economy is so important, because as you get more and more and more and more information, the scarcity in the system that everybody's fighting for is human attention. And nowadays, whether it be social media websites or whatever, your attention is now something that is bought and paid for. It becomes a question of how to keep you on these systems longer so that you can be fed advertisements so that they can make you money, or they can make more money. So this is where you get algorithms that are designing your feeds in such a way to keep you scrolling longer. This is where you get short form video content, because we've realized that, that's something that keeps people scrolling and gets their attention for longer. And this is where nowadays you have even more information, because AI can generate in some ways better answers than we can sometimes off the drop of a dime, sometimes horrible answers. And so these information systems have got out of control because you have so much, and the thing that everybody is competing for is simply your attention. So Here's some of the things that these information systems do. They can scale your attention. So think print, radio, television. So all of a sudden information is going more all over the world. They can synchronize attention. If you think of television broadcasts or radio broadcasts, you have a lot of people getting the same amount of information on the same thing. If you have people that, remember the good old days where Walter Cronkite would, give you the true one-sided version of the story, it was synchronized attention. They can fragment attention to where all of a sudden your attention is to smaller pockets of things that you are interested in. So think of the internet. Think of the fact you have mobile phones in your pocket to break your cycle of attention. They can try to optimize your attention, not for you, but for the sake of you scrolling longer, for you staying on their platforms longer. And ultimately, we're in an era where attention is now monetized, and especially if they can tie it to your identity and who you are to keep you scrolling for longer. So we are really deep in those last three. And it's reshaping even our brains. We won't get too much into that, and how we interact with one another. You might be saying, I'm just a pastor or church leader. Why should I care about that? I know everybody in this conference looks just like that, don't they? Because your people aren't just scrolling, they are actively being discipled and trained. The medium in which they communicate is also shaping and influencing them as well. 2 hours and 21 minutes, you can probably guess what that is. It's the average daily user time on social media. Anyone want to throw a number out there for what it is for, and this is just social media for teens? Oh, y'all are too cruel to teens. No, it's 4 hours and 48 minutes. But that's just social media. Because the algorithms that we scroll through optimize for addiction, not truth, it has an incredible impact on how we perceive things, on how we understand stories, on how we understand things that are going on in our wider culture. And it also has some horrible disruptive problems. Anyone remember in 2016, there was a big scandal around election time with Facebook? What was going on? Jack, you know it? Yeah. Cambridge Analytica. So what happened was a bunch of Russians used Facebook for the sake of election interference, in a sense, just creating a bunch of propaganda. It was a big scandal. Ultimately, Zuckerberg had to talk before Congress on it. But in the midst of that scandal, there's an internal memo on Facebook's message board that so powerfully defines how they work as a company. It says this: "We talk about the good and the bad of our work often. I want to talk about the ugly. We connect people. That can be good if they make it positive. Maybe someone finds love. Maybe it even saves the life of somebody on the brink of suicide. So we connect more people. That can be bad if they make it negative. Maybe it costs a life by exposing someone to bullies. Maybe someone dies in a terrorist attack coordinated on our tools. And still, we connect people. The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people more often is de facto good. It is perhaps the only area the metrics do tell the true story as far as we are concerned. This isn't something we're doing for ourselves or for our stock price. It's literally just what we do. We connect people, period." Jeff Kloa a second ago talked about how in institutions, the things you prioritize are the things that you spend your money on, this thing that you spend your time on. What is that clearly for Facebook? Connecting people. But is Facebook actually connecting people? No, it's not physically connecting people. It's connecting people to Facebook, to the platform. And here's what's crazy about that is, many of you know, psychologists have done a lot of research. It's going more and more into social media and how we interact with these things. If you look at the rise and the introduction of smartphones and social media with young adults, for example, you see clear rises in depression and anxiety with the introduction and normalization of the smartphone and social media. And even if you're somebody that you say, yeah, but like maybe we see those things more often nowadays. You know, when I was growing up, not everybody was anxious. They were just kind of that's just a nervous Nelly sort of a thing. Well, if you match it up with the rates of hospitalizations from self-harm, which is not something that gets diagnosed, that's an admission, it also lines up. And here's what's so hard about this is when someone's depressed, one of the results oftentimes of that depression is that they will tend to be somebody that isolates themselves, that's a little more stagnant. They will tend to be somebody that says, I'm gonna stay on my own, I don't wanna be around other people, and they tend to stay still. And yes, that can be a cause of depression, but that can also further depression. And what are we doing with the devices that we're creating and interacting with? We're creating methodologies where we stay stagnant and we stay isolated. 20%. So one of the fundamental questions is, how do you keep people scrolling longer? How does Facebook connect people more? Well, the obvious way is to figure out what are the emotions that people respond well to while they're scrolling that are powerful enough to keep them scrolling. And one of the best ways to do that is utilizing anger and outrage. So if you have anger and outrageous language in your post, you're 20% more likely to show up into people's feeds. Outrage is the most reliable growth hack on the internet, on earth. And it creates some horribly perverse incentives for the church. Any of you guys Twitter users in here? No, we have like 2 Twitter users in this. Okay, just a few. How do you like to, I guess it's X now, Zitter? I don't know what you want to call it. If you want to 2 times your retweets, you know what you need to do? There's a study, and what they found is that posts about political outgroups, so people that disagree from whatever your core group are shared and retweeted about 2 times as often as posts about in-groups. And that's not just wider, Republican Democrat politics, although that's what the study was originated from. That can include interchurch politics as well. So anger is one of the biggest emotions that will keep you scrolling. Humor is another one of the biggest emotions that'll keep you scrolling. And sometimes humor is very innocent, and other times humor is contempt that sneaks past your conscience. Humor is leveraging in-group, out-group thinking so that you feel vindicated in seeing the other person as your enemy. This is something that we are actively ourselves likely, and most of our people are being catechized and shaped by. Trained to see enemies, not neighbors. I really believe that if Jesus was giving the parable of the Good Samaritan today, he would just use whatever the opposite of your political party is as the Samaritan. This is why our people often care much more about the culture war than they do the kingdom come. It's fascinating talking to pastors who have been in ministry for much longer than I have, because many of them will express some frustrations or grievances on the fact that there is much more expectation in 2026 that you are going to speak to whatever the hot topic political issue is. So for example, 3 weeks ago, there's a shooting in Minneapolis. And because of the fact that algorithms just optimize for what keeps you scrolling instead of truth, all of a sudden with every major event, you have a litmus test that takes place. You have 2 radically different interpretations of the facts that are happening. And so there's a portion for your church when it comes to this shooting. They're saying this is somebody who is trying to stop good men and women of law enforcement that are arresting pedophiles and are getting rid of just disgusting people in our country. There are other people in your church that are going to say, hey, this was an American who is using his God-given right to protest, exercising the Second Amendment right that he has to have his gun. He was being held down and he was shot in the back. It's a Saturday. Sunday's coming. Are you going to pray for it? Are you going to preach about it? How are you going to pray for it and preach about it? Because of these 2 very different interpretations of events, you get caught in the middle. And I could do this with other things. I could do this with Charlie Kirk. I could do this with elections, right? Our people are all in on the culture war. Why? Because they've been fed anger and outrage over and over about these political topics. Even if you use that excuse in your head that says, hey, listen, I'm just trying to be a good civic American. I'm just trying to be updated about civic events and, fulfill my responsibility as a citizen. I would tend to challenge that, because here's the thing. If you're thinking of how you can love your neighbor, can you do that at a national level outside of casting your vote one time? No, the place you can do the most change if you want to be civically involved at all is at your local level, and most of our people by and far can't tell you who the mayor or the local governor is. When the culture war sets the agenda, every issue starts to demand a side. And it's crazy how this plays out. Because all of a sudden, if somebody tips over a sacred cow or offends enough people, they'll flock to another thing, right? Like, my beer company did this, well, we're gonna go and form our own beer company, right? Oh, their Super Bowl halftime show star said that, oh my goodness, they said this about the president, well, we're gonna go and form our own Super Bowl halftime show. Our church body went and did this. Talking about the Methodists, of course. I don't know what you all are thinking of. The problem is, truth does not get retweeted anywhere near as often, and that causes major problems. It happens time after time after time, where the thing that gets popularized is false, and the correction that gets made, if it gets made after the fact, goes nowhere near as viral. And you get stuck in those two radically different interpretation of events. It causes major problems across us at a wider level and even at a synodical level. So how can we, as the body of Christ, as the church, be engaged during this time of disruption? I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers. Here's just things, as I've done some wider reading, that I think are helpful on this question of what are we supposed to do about this. First off, let's think back. What did we do in the past? We asked ourselves, how do we use this technology in a way that's disruptive for the sake of the wider kingdom of God? The Reformation would not have happened if Martin Luther didn't work with lay people using the printing press to mass produce media. The Lutheran Hour would not have happened if you wouldn't have had incredible lay people making the radio broadcasts over America happen. We have a far underutilized theology of the priesthood of all believers. But if you look back in our history, that is core to the church doing something incredible by utilizing technology. And if you guys know who this is, Luke Ferreter, Chloe, you might know who he is. I don't know where Chloe is off at. Do you know this guy? Oh, you know who this guy is? Oh, cool. So he's a random University of Nebraska-Lincoln student who had this Vesuvius challenge. So for the Vesuvius scroll, now you know who it is. That they struck with x-rays and then got that image, and they're trying to figure out, okay, whoever can solve this challenge, there's a big reward for it. And he had learned about large language models and artificial intelligence and ended up just running a program overnight that cracked the code. There's crazy opportunities that we have nowadays, especially with the fact that artificial intelligence allows us to do information creation at a level that we've just never been able to do before. So here's my general encouragement for all of us. First is simply this: spend less time attacking one another and more time battling the world, the flesh, and the devil. We know that these systems incentivize in-group, out-group behavior, incentivize attacking one another, incentivize poor framing of other people's beliefs. So stop wasting time shooting at people you don't like in your church body when you have this bigger battle against the world, the flesh, and the devil. This is something Paul lays out clearly in Ephesians. I think all of us as Christians should be able to think, is there a way that I could start consuming less and start creating more, creating something, trying something? The third and obvious one is realize God gave you in-person neighbors to love. God has given you the people around you, both in your family vocations, but also just literally around you. See, even though more and more people in our world are meeting digitally, people are much more isolated than ever before. This is a graph, by the way, of how couples will say they've met. And you'll notice the huge drop through friends, through family, work, bars, grade school, neighbors, and college, and the exponential rise of meeting online. See, the attention economy hasn't just stolen focus, it has quietly starved people of friendships. 2008, the average amount of minutes that Americans spent with friends is 60 minutes a day. In 2023, that number has dropped to 26 minutes. You think that's bad? About 12% of Americans say they have 0 close friends. We are starved for relationship. That's up from 3% in 1990. It's a 4 times increase. So a year ago at this conference, we talked about the topic of praying boldly, just praying specific, bold prayers. Chris Pavela led us in that time. And I moved over this last summer, moved to a new house in Lincoln, Nebraska, back in the hometown that I grew up in, and moved into a new neighborhood, and I'd been there for 3 or 4 months, and it struck me, I haven't met a single one of my neighbors. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I meet them? It feels really weird if you've been there for like 4 months and you're like, hey, I just moved in 4 months ago. So I was trying to figure it out, and so I'm like, I'm just gonna pray, God, would you just give me an opportunity to meet my neighbors? Like, give me just some opportunity to meet my neighbors. A couple weeks later, like late for lunch, I overscheduled my day, and I pull into the garage, and a yellow Labrador retriever walks up to me, just wandering. And so I like grab it by the collar, because I'm like, okay, this is somebody's dog, and I see a fence that's open across the street, and so I walk in, and lo and behold, it was my neighbor who is so grateful that I returned him. And he asked, oh yeah, are you the guy with the California plates that moved in? I'm like, yeah. He's like, hey, don't bring your California to my Nebraska. I said, don't worry, I grew up here. And then we got to that inevitable point in the conversation that happens. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a pastor. And he proceeded to tell me about his background growing up Catholic, and that he had gone through a divorce and now feels isolated from his church, isolated from his community. He was laid off from his job, but given like 2 years of severance. And so he's like, I'm okay, but I'm just in this weird place right now, pouring his heart out. People are starved for relationship. And we have a wonderful opportunity to get to connect with them and point them to Jesus. If that sounds overwhelming to you, that idea of like, I don't know how I'm gonna meet these people, or I don't know what I'm gonna do, just pray about it. Like, you don't know what God can do, but God's gonna show up. This would be my 4th reminder for us, is if you are somebody that makes things online or creates content, if you're in that world, do not forget your role. This is Oswald Hoffman. He was one of the big Lutheran Hour speakers in the 50s. There was a magazine interview with him, and I love the way the newspaper, I should say, put it. He said, broadcast ministers run into trouble when they start believing what their most avid followers sometimes say about them. The attention showered on such preachers, but you can fill this in with influencers, Twitter posters, whatever, approaches idolatry and can cause them to forget their roles as servants of God. Do not forget your role. Do not forget your role and vocation, whether it be first and foremost as a child of God, but then as a father, as a brother, all the different areas that God has called you to. But also, don't be afraid to make something. I've talked to so many people that have an idea of like a video or a podcast or a thing they want to do online, but they're like, I don't know how to do it, and I don't know what I do, and I'm just hesitant about it. Go for it. Yeah, what if it's bad? Of course it's gonna be bad. Every time you start something, you are bad at it. My wife's a music teacher. You know how many little kids are trying their instruments and they're bad at it? If you've never been an artist and you start learning how to draw, you are going to be bad at it. Same thing online. As you begin to create or try or do new things, you're going to be bad at it. So instead of learning to beat yourself up over being bad, celebrate it. Celebrate that you actually made something. Like, even this conference is awesome. We made a conference of missional people gathering together for the sake of the kingdom. It's good. Anyone know the answer to this question? So over the last few years, there's been this crazy growth of Mormon influencers. Anyone know what that's about? It's crazy. So in the Mormon church, and we all know Mormon theology, radically incorrect in how they view Jesus and the Trinity, but we're gonna talk about their presence online for a second. So Mormons, when they're on their year doing their mission trip, they are, I don't know if I was strongly encouraged to journal about their experience, to journal about what's going on, and that habit for most of them continues throughout the rest of their lives where they journal about their days. Well, a couple years ago, Mormon churches and Mormon leaders started encouraging their men and women saying, hey, you already, reflect on your day, make a video of it. And out of that, you have this crazy rise of Mormon mommy blog influencers. It's crazy. Like there are millions of followers of people simply reflecting, oh, here's my day, here's what I do. Like, I don't get it, not my world, not my content. But here's what I find fascinating about that is here's a group of people, heretical in their view of Jesus, that said, how can we use a habit that we've given and leverage it for the sake of others? 6, I would say this, be kind to creators and creative people. My last call was in Los Angeles, and so I had a number of people who were actors, a number of people who were writers, some animators, and it was so funny because I would talk with them about like, hey, would you ever want to go into like, there's like that Christian acting movie world? And I always got the same response, oh, no way. You know why? Who's the people that get most upset about Christian-produced things? Christians. Like we had a Super Bowl ad a year ago. It was the most Christian group has ever spent on a Super Bowl ad, and Christians were exponentially more angry about it than anyone else was. This is the reality, right? You have a TV show like The Chosen where, oh man, we're trying to figure out how to put the life of Jesus like onto the screen, and I think philosophically, you have this interesting phenomenon where part of being a good theologian is taking God and then using the word to narrow down, okay, this is who God is. You're constantly narrowing down to correctly make sure this is who God is and rightly speak to that. And yet the job of an artist is the opposite, where you say, okay, this is what we know about God. How do we use the world around us to express that? So there constantly is this tension. And how it plays out over and over again is Christians beating up their own. Like 7 months ago, I was flying out to California for a PLI gathering, and there was a couple on the plane behind me. We're chatting about, they're excited they're going to go to Disneyland, and they're so happy for it. They're wearing the Mickey ears. They're happy as can be. I'm so happy for them. And once again, we get to that inevitable point. What do you do for a living? I'm a pastor, which normally just kills the conversation outright. But he said, oh, that's really cool. I actually grew up in the Catholic Church. I haven't gone to church for years, but my friend recently turned me on to The Chosen. And there's this part of me that just wants to go back to church. Oh, let's talk about that. Be kind to creators. God can use their creativity. We so often wonder, like, where's the Christian creatives? They're afraid to enter into the industry. Or at least to let it be known they're Christians in the industry. They get attacked in the industry if they're Christians. If they go into the Christian industry, they get attacked by Christians. 7, catechesis on this matters. This is the waters that we as a wider culture are swimming in. Teaching people about it and what it means is really important. I want to go back to the ship of Odysseus. Because here's what I think the huge lesson is for us in this, that at the end of the day, you don't resist the sirens by just white-knuckling it or trying to use your willpower. You resist the sirens, you win by restraining. How do you build systems of restraint? So what's your strategy when it comes to this? We're not going to talk wider church. Let's get individual. Are you happy with your amount of tech use? Or are you not? This is one of those things. I know it can become a legalism thing. Don't make it a legalism thing, okay? But do ask, are you intentional with your strategy? For some people, they say, I so hate these technologies, I'm going to be a Luddite. I'm not going to use Facebook. I'm not going to use any social media. I'm disconnecting from all of it. I'm just going to do face-to-face interactions. If that's where you are led, awesome. Good for you. That's fine. For other people, they say, it's the fact that I have this phone in my pocket that constantly is tethered, that I can break in and do things with. So I'm going to get a dumb phone. I'm going to get a phone that looks like it's from the early 2000s that can't do social media stuff. And I'm going to just make sure that I'm not pulled into the sirens by changing that. Other people that like to keep their smartphone use something like Brick. If you don't know what Brick is, it's a physical thing. You program your phone, you tap your phone to it, and it kills all the apps that you want to kill so you cannot access them. If you are somebody that wants a Brick but you don't want to pay 50 or 60 bucks, you can do what I do, which is the poor man's alternative, Focus, F-O-Q-O-S. Buy a couple stickers for $2 and get effectively the same thing. All sorts of other steps you can take that are just basic recommendations, like killing all your notifications that are pulling and distracting you, adding friction between you and your phone. How do you make it harder for you to grab the device? You can do time box feeds to make sure that, like, hey, I'm limiting the amount of times that I use on these things. You can have a mentality that says, I'm gonna focus on the one thing at a time and only allow myself to ever have one tab open. You can create deep work rituals, rituals of how you say, during this time, this is what I'm working on and nothing else, and I'm gonna cut off everything else to make sure that I'm focusing on the most important thing. You could fast from tech. You could say, hey, during Lent, I'm gonna, these certain days, just only be present in person and not use technology. I know a bunch of you are pastors, which means you're nerds who like to read. If that's you, here's a number of books that kind of influence this presentation. Major one, Chris Hayes, The Sirens Call, where the sirens metaphor comes from. You have Johann Hari's Stolen Focus. That's kind of a basic explanation of the attention economy and why it matters. Tim Wu's The Attention Merchants talks about the commercialization of human attention. Stand Out of Our Light by James Williams is kind of a more philosophical reflection on the implications of how we can interact correctly with the attention economy. New Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, such a good read. I'll give you just the opening and tell you why it's so powerful. So Postman wrote this in the late 80s, after 1984. And during 1984, everybody's freaking out because they're saying, we're nervous about Big Brother. We're nervous 1984 is gonna come true. And so in the intro of the book, Postman says, you know, there was actually another dystopian novel that was written at the same time. Yes, you have 1984, where Big Brother controls you and controls information and manipulates you. But you know what else you have? Brave New World. That's right, you've read it. And in Brave New World, you're not controlled and manipulated from the top down. No, in Brave New World, it's just pleasure, it's soma, it's fun, it's sleeping together that ultimately pacifies people. A really good book about technology there. If you want some practical stuff on habits you can build, Cal Newport has like 2 or 3 books. Deep Work, Digital Minimalism. If you hate email, he has a really good book called A World Without Email. Highly recommend it. And then if you care about stats about high schoolers, people who are young in smartphone usage, Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. Really good book if you had like a youth group or something you wanted to walk through with that. So why does this matter? These are my kids. That's my son, Augustine, and my daughter, Kyrie. So we moved to Nebraska, and Nebraska has this thing that falls out of the sky called rain. We don't really get that in California. And so we had our first major rainfall, and my kids had just gotten rain jackets. They went outside, they're playing, they're as happy as can be. I don't have a rain jacket. I still just have a sweatshirt. So at first I'm watching them as they're having a blast. They're putting leaves into the river and running alongside of it as it's flowing down. They're having an absolute blast. I'm watching them. I'm getting soaked. So I go into the garage and, watch from afar. And I keep watching. Then I realize, hey, I could check some email. And I hear a voice scream out to me, Dad! Dad! Going viral? For you preachers in the room, have you ever had a moment where you preach on something and then your wife or your kids remind you about what you preach on? About a month before, we'd had a short little sermon series called Going Viral, talking about our relationship with technology, how technology is designed in a way to attract us and to pull us in. And it took a reminder from my son, robbing me of getting to see the beauty and joy of this moment, of them enjoying the wonder of God's creation and playing with it in a great way. During that sermon, this was our theme text for it from Luke 10. It's from Mary and Martha. Now, as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. but Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her. When it comes to our interaction with technology, it is easy to be anxious, to be troubled by many things, but we can choose the good portion, which will not be taken from us. Thank you so much for the time and getting to present to you. Am I ending early? Could I cede some time to Chloe to come back up here and give us the rest of his presentation, man? No, but seriously, this is part of what I do believe on this is that when it comes to our interactions with technology this way, it goes back to how we never did anything to disrupt the internet, right? Do we really need a dude talking at us for 50 minutes? Let's actually learn to talk about this with each other. Also, selfish plug, I have a book called The Ends of the LCMS that's a little manifesto on the future of the LCMS and how we should focus on our telos. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's really so good. Dude, you're outstanding.
Thank you.